Welcome friends to this tutorial series. In this series, I'm going to use the Cypress testing tool. We are going to use a to-do app that has a GraphQL interface to its backend API. We are going to use the Cypress Intercept command a lot, and we're going to do a full hands-on training on testing this app. The main idea how you can use the Intercept command when testing apps that use a GraphQL interface to an API, and how you can test your apps A with a complete end-to-end and B in an isolated front-end only environment. To get started, we're going to first take you to the app itself. There are two things that I expect you to know. One, you should be able to use the Cypress testing tool, that you have familiarity with it, because I'm not going to go over the basics of it. We are going to focus on what we need to do our tests here. And the second thing what I would like you to know is how GraphQL queries work and how are they different from a typical REST API. If you need a refresher on how GraphQL works or how it's different from REST API, in the description below you will see a link to another tutorial where I explain that. If you need to refresh those concepts, feel free to look at that video first, and then we continue with this tutorial. I want to show you what this app can do. It's a very simple app. You have to-do lists here. You can create a new to-do item, let's say new item, and you click the create button and then creates that item there, and you can drag and drop that item to another list, or you can delete that item. To keep things simple, we are going to do the test for loading this page, create a to-do item, and we're going to delete a to-do item. Now, if I clear the network tab here and I simply load this page, and I'm also going to be looking for XHR calls. Let's say we load this app. You see it makes this GraphQL request. It goes out to this endpoint, and here it makes a query. The operation name is home page query, and it wants a few things like lists and the items inside it. What does it get back? It gets back in its data key a key called lists. List is an array. It has 4 lists here, so those are the 4 lists that you see here. Inside each list item you see an ID. That's the ID of these lists, and then you see an items array. The items array has the items inside it. If I want to test that this page loads, I'm going to intercept this query with this specific operation name, and I will ensure that I actually get a response back for it before I continue with my tests. Now, when you create a new item here, let's say I get new item and I submit, I see I first make this GraphQL request. It again goes to the same endpoint. That's the beauty of GraphQL. You have one endpoint. Here the operation name is create item mutation, and the name suggests that this is actually a mutation for which the input is a name called new item. That's the name I gave here, and a list ID, so it knows in which list it's going to create. A response for this is one item object, the item that was created. It gets an ID here, the name that we gave, and the list ID that we gave. And once it gets a positive response, status 200 for this request, it makes another request, which is the same one as the one it made earlier for the homepage query. So it needs to query the homepage again so that it now knows what to display now. To get started with this, I have already created a project here for you. It has Cypress version 7.2 installed in it, and we are going to write our first spec file. I want to first do the end-to-end version of it. That's the easier one, and then we're going to do the version in which we stub the backend. So let's call it the e2e.spec.js. Before I start writing any Cypress tests in a JavaScript file, I'm going to type this piece of code. This piece of code helps me get IntelliSense. I'm going to show you very quickly. It helps you autocomplete your commands, and it also helps give hints on how to use the commands. So let's start to create a describe block. To do app E2E tests. Inside it, I'm going to create an it block. Should be able to load the lists. In that, first going to visit the URL. This is the URL we are going to visit. Let's just run Open Cypress. If you don't have any scripts created here, I don't have any. So I'm just going to run npx cypress open. That's the easiest way to open Cypress. And we're just going to run this just to check if this thing works out and loads the list. Okay, looks nice. So now we have this GraphQL request that we made, and this is the one that we need to intercept. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we actually make this request and we get a response, and the response has a status code of 200. For that, we write the Cypress intercept command. The first parameter is my method. I always know that this is a post call. I don't want to make, by mistake, the app make a get request to the backend. The next thing is the URL where it makes the request. So let's look at the app, and we find the URL here, and we post it here. Now we intercept this, and we now need to give it an alias. So we give it an alias. Let's say, I'm just going to make it say request. Now the reason why we give it an alias is that because we want to wait for this. So we define the intercept here. We now visit, and at the end we want to wait for this request to complete. We're going to save this, and the test is going to run again. And here you see a request that was aliased as request here was made, and the status response of that request was 200. Cypress does this for us. If you do not get a 2xx result back or 3xx result back, it assumes it to be a failure. Now you see here, you did have route aliased, but it wasn't stubbed. That's what we did. For now, this is okay, but the challenge with GraphQL is that you have one endpoint for making all kind of requests for queries and mutations. And what you need to know is what was the actual payload in my request. That my operation name has to be a page query in this case, and I need to check for that as well. So we are going to make a change in our code. We are going to delete this part, and we are going to put in a third parameter to our intercept command. In this is basically a function which receives the request object as input, and now inside that function we can make some checks on this. Now we are going to make sure that the operation name of the body for this request actually matches homepage query. So I'm going to say if request dot body dot operation name, that equals homepage query. Let's copy this guy from here and paste it here. If that matches this, then we're going to give it an alias, and we're going to let it go to the server in the backend. We say request.alias is equal to, let's say, homepage query in this case. Now this is something that has changed from Cypress 6. In Cypress 7, this is a property, and in Cypress 6, I think it was a function. the first thing what we do here is we give it an alias, and so we are actually going to wait not for request but for homepage query. And what we want to do is we want to let it continue further to the server. By this, we are going to simply alias this query, but we're going to let it go back to the backend, then visit the page and wait for this query to happen. Now I'm going to save this and we're going to run this. That's nice. We have now checked that we actually make the right query and not something else. And for that, we give it the right alias. We wait for the alias. So if I want to make it a negative test, let's say I make it query 3, and what's going to happen is it's going to wait. Let's zoom this bit in. Now it says I was waiting 5 seconds for the first request to this route. No request ever occurred because we wrote the wrong name here, and this if wasn't fulfilled. This request never got this alias, and so this alias doesn't appear. Let's put this back to where it should be, and voila. At this stage, you can do a number of things that you want to check. Because this series is focused on GraphQL and adding new tests doesn't add value to this video, we are not going to add that, and I leave that up to you. Good. So we have a working test here. This is the first test in our series for the end-to-end. In the next video, we are going to add more tests, one for adding a to-do item and then for deleting the to-do item. I'll catch you in the next video.